Hello, my name is Matt Whitman. This is the 10-Minute Bible Hour podcast, and I have a conundrum here because there's a movie that I saw a couple of years ago, and it was great, like the best thing I saw that whole year. It's a mystery show. But if I tell you the name of it and then go on to talk about how it worked, I might ruin it. I'm not sure enough about how it ended. I'm just going to have to be vague. There's a movie. It was really good. It was a mystery. I think you might like it. Good luck figuring out what it was. But it's one of these movies that does the thing where you get to the end and there's all this mystery and nobody knows who did what. And there are these facts that are in the shadows and facts that are in the open. And sometimes a very clever detective can put some morsels out there to make someone they suspect might have been involved weigh in on things they theoretically shouldn't know. And that's what happens in this movie. And that's what happens in a lot of movies. Why am I talking about all of this? Because in Matthew 27, we discover that the Pharisees maybe knew a little bit more about what Jesus was claiming than we would have guessed so far. They come to Pontius Pilate, and it looks like they suddenly totally understand what Jesus' claims were and that resurrection was something he had predicted. But get this, when we go back through the book of Matthew and we look at all of those predictive passages, it looks like he's saying that stuff primarily to his disciples. One of those is at the campfire with Peter's confession of Christ. That's 16. 17, when he tells them that, that's just coming down the mountain from the transfiguration. So that is super private. And I don't remember the context of 20. And you know what we can do when we don't remember something is you can use the Bible to figure it out. Okay, 20. It's in 17. Okay, now Jesus was going up to Jerusalem. He took the 12 disciples aside, and said to them, "We're going up to Jerusalem. The Son of Man will be betrayed to the chief priests and the teachers of the elders will all be condemned him to death, and we'll turn him over to the Gentiles to be mocked and flogged and crucified. On the third day, he will be raised to life." Yeah, that's right. And then right after that, the mother of James and John comes up to Jesus and hits him with the metaphorical, "When you are dead, can we have your watch?" Question. Got it. So yeah, all three of those are in private. It would have been awkward between us if that Matthew 21 had turned out to have been in public, but it wasn't. So how, may I ask, good sir, did these Pharisees know a thing about what Jesus was saying in private? Okay, possibility number one for how the Pharisees are able to come to Pontius Pilate and say, "Sir, we remember that while he was still alive, that deceiver said, 'After 3 days I will rise again.'" That's Matthew 27:62. Possibility number one is that in chapters 12 and 16, when Jesus is talking with them and they're demanding a sign, you'll remember this if you've been going through the whole Matthew thing with me, Jesus says, "I'm not going to give you any sign except for the sign of Jonah." And in chapter 12, he goes into more detail. He says, "A wicked and adulterous generation asks for a miraculous sign, but none will be given it except for the sign of Jonah." That's verse 39. Verse 40. "For as Jonah was 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of a huge fish, so the Son of Man will be 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth." And then he goes on to talk about other stuff, Nineveh and other famous things from back in the day. And then in chapter 16, they come at him again. They're like, "But still we want signs." And that's where he gives them the whole, like, yeah, red sky at night. You guys know how to read the weather. How is it then you can't see the signs at the time? But right at the end, he repeats what he said in chapter 12. He says, "A wicked and adulterous generation looks for a miraculous sign, but none will be given it except for the sign of Jonah." But that's it. There's no record of him going into the details there or extrapolating further on what that sign will look like. I guess that's kind of an "I have spoken" kind of thing. He's already put it out there. So maybe possibility number one in our investigation into how the Pharisees know so much about Jesus' super private resurrection claims is that they connected the dots on the Jonah stuff that Jesus was saying in chapters 12 and 16. In which case, why didn't you believe him? Why didn't you press him about that or ask him more questions? If they thought that was completely absurd and laughable, why didn't they point that out to everybody when they were trying to demonstrate that Jesus was dumb and bad and wrong? Well, that is what we call a bona fide mystery. Possibility number two is that Judas just went to them and ratted him out. And Jesus told the disciples all this stuff in private. Then Judas goes and not only sells Jesus out, but he's like, "I'm an important boy and I know other things too. Like, did you know he said this or this or this?" Especially if we embrace the idea that maybe Judas didn't believe Jesus' resurrection claim and he wanted to get off that train while the getting was good. Maybe he felt he wanted to bring that up if indeed Jesus' resurrection prediction was something Judas couldn't accept, and it sent him into panic mode. Maybe that would prompt him to bring it up to the religious leaders as someone who says too many words and who does not know the age-old discipline of when you have the answer you want, hang up the phone, just shut up, quit talking, collect your silver, get on with it. So maybe the Pharisees knew about Jesus' claims about resurrection because they're more attentive and better listeners than we thought, and they caught the references to the sign of Jonah in chapters 12 and 16. Maybe Judas just ratted Jesus out in this regard. Maybe after that thing that happened in chapter 20 where he pulled the disciples aside that we looked at a little bit ago, maybe he just said a bunch of things in public, and it wasn't a private thing anymore, and by this point, Jesus was just calling his shot. That certainly could be, and you could maybe make that case looking at some of the other Gospels as well. Maybe it was one of those timing things where Jesus was like, well, it's not yet my time, so we're not going to say that thing yet. We're not going to do that thing yet. I mean, that's how we see other stuff playing out earlier in the book of Matthew. Maybe it's like that. Or maybe when the accusers come in the kangaroo court trial in Matthew 26 that happens under cover of darkness, and the religious leaders finally get a couple of witnesses to say something they think will stick or to say what they wanted to be said. Maybe even though the witnesses' charge against Jesus on its face seems to be a threat against the temple, maybe the religious leaders totally did know what he meant. They had heard rumors or rumbling about this as well, and they wanted it to be framed not from their own lips, but from the lips of public witnesses. They wanted it to be framed as, no, it's literally a discussion about the temple. We don't even want these ideas about resurrection floating out there. So maybe it benefited the religious leaders not to proliferate this, even in a critical way, not to come out and say, no, it's ridiculous. He's saying this is it's absurd. Maybe they wanted that literal read on it, and that's why they fixated on the false witnesses they fixated on. And when they said, this fellow said, I'm here to destroy the temple of God and rebuild it in 3 days, the silly, simple witnesses really thought that we were talking about the temple. But the Pharisees were like, no, we know exactly what you mean, and we're going to kind of keep that under wraps, but that confirms for us what we thought was going on here. We'll let the public think it was a threat against the building. We'll let Pilate even think it was a threat against the building. But after the fact, after he's already good and dead, now we're going to go back and acknowledge that, no, we did know that information before we were technically supposed to have known it. Give these guys credit. They're politically savvy. They're ruthless. They make smart, effective, if dirty moves that would work on simpler people, but they just can't seem to outfox Jesus, and that makes sense given what we see about him on the pages in what Matthew records. Tomorrow we're going to look at the way all of this interaction between the Pharisees and Pilate and everything else adds up to the deck being stacked against resurrection. There are so many factors in place, including the general idea that normally dead people remain that way, that are all set up to make this not just a really impressive thing, but a completely unfathomably impossible thing. By every metric, this can't happen. The Pharisees have seen to it. And yet somehow in the next chapter, we know in advance we're heading toward a resurrection. Crazy. I got a couple of things, though, before we get to tomorrow that we need to talk about. Proximo. The guy's name was Proximo. I thought about it laying in bed last night, and it came to me. I was like, that's the guy. That was the dude who was, his name starts with a P, and he was coaching Maximus Meridius, whatever it is. He was the guy. And he was played by the legendary character actor Oliver Reed, who died of a heart attack on the island of Malta on set making the movie Gladiator. I just thought you'd want to know all those things. I said a couple of things on the way out the door. Here's the other thing. Was it yesterday or was it the day before? Whenever it was, no, it was a couple days ago when we were going through and we were comparing all of the gospel accounts of Joseph of Arimathea, you might have gotten the impression that I was like, obviously I know what all of these say because I check that in advance because I don't want to look stupid in front of you. Like I want you to trust me, listen to my podcast and stuff. I mean, this is what I do for a living. I wouldn't want to be embarrassed by having you know that I don't know every single thing about the Bible all at once. And so you might have got the impression that I was just pretending not to know all the other details that we gathered as we worked through that. And then I'd make it seem like a surprise for you. But you know what? I didn't know. I totally did not remember that Nicodemus participated in this. I mean, it's right there. I'm sure probably tons of you remember that, but I did not remember that. And I just think it's important from time to time, given that in podcasting or anything like this, writing books, you got the power of the edit on your side, and that can give the impression that some people are just, how do they know all these things about the Bible? It's amazing. I could never do that. And I think it's just really important to disclose how much of this stuff that I absolutely do not know, and I am learning along with you, because hopefully that serves as a reminder that we can all do this. This document is meant to be understood. It wants to be understood. We do not have to be some kind of Bible geniuses who know all the things about all the things in order to do this work and to understand what the Bible is trying to do. We just take our time, ask reasonable questions, do basic homework to go and look up other things and compare notes, and we keep learning together. It's really fun. And I give every last one of you who did remember the Nicodemus thing permission to just make fun of me at dinner with your family tonight. I'm not threatened by that. Besides, not knowing things is fun because then you have surprises in your life, and that was a really pleasant and enjoyable surprise. Now that's all the things. On to God stacking the deck against himself next time around. I'm Matt. This is the 10-Minute Bible Hour podcast. Let's do this again soon.